Early Breakfast with Rosie Wright on Times Radio.
And the Times this morning leads, as do many of the papers, with that decision from David Lammy saying Labour puts limits on arms deals with Israel. The Guardian has the same story, though, saying the UK has broken with the US to suspend those export licences to Israel. The Mirror are talking about the latest. This story is going to keep running, I think, for a little bit. Kia versus Oasis. The Prime Minister's vowed to take action after thousands of music fans were hit with huge price rises in the Oasis reunion's ticket shambles, says the paper. And the Telegraph says petrol cars will be rationed to meet eco targets. Firms cannot supply vehicles people want because those electric vehicle quotas force them to limit sales. Going through the stories inside the papers with me this morning, Andrew Eborn, the barrister, broadcaster, president of Octopus TV. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie. Always a delight to join you.
I think the Times puts it to say, look, these laws to tackle the dynamic ticket prices may have come a little bit too late.
Well, you're absolutely right. People who queued more than 3 hours thinking they would pay an initially advertised rate of £148.50 for Oasis are looking back in anger because they ended up paying almost double at £355.20. And this is dynamic pricing. It's also known as surge pricing, which is basically the strategy in which businesses push up prices at times of high demand. And airline tickets and hotel rooms do a similar sort of thing. But it's a massive concern. And ticket prices are horrendous anyway. But it's up to the artists themselves whether they do it, and Ticketmaster introduced this practice fairly recently. It is legal at the moment as long as the company follows laws and regulations related to pricing transparency, and basically it was introduced in 2022 and they said, Ticketmaster, to stop the touts. It's very interesting.
Should it stay legal, Andrew? Yeah. Because this is supply and demand, isn't it?
Well, it is totally supply and demand, and it's up to the artists themselves if they want this to happen. So Bruce Springsteen gave Live Nation, for example, the green light to introduce dynamic pricing for his tickets. But Taylor Swift, so all the Swifties all around the world who paid an absolute fortune, she opted out of this dynamic pricing. So it is up to the artists. It is dynamic pricing, which is dependent on market forces. And sadly, that's the reality. My best advice to people is actually, if you want to try and get these tickets, is sometimes look at possibly going abroad, because you get a holiday as well, probably for the same price as you're paying for tickets over here.
But do you think the government should intervene here?
Well, it's commercial forces, isn't it? I think the reality is that consumers need to be protected. They mustn't be misled. But ultimately, it's up to the artists concerned how much they charge for their services. So it's a question for the whole industry. The biggest impact is obviously sometimes you get these small venues which are struggling while these massive stadiums are doing very well. I had Harvey Goldsmith on my show very recently, and he was saying exactly that. These stadium things are being absolutely tremendously bought out several times. But small venues are really struggling in the current climate.
Let's talk about what's happening in Ofsted, that big announcement yesterday. There's a new timetable that should sort of ease the stress of inspections for head teachers and teachers. The lady who's always dubbed as Britain's strictest head teacher, though, has said, this is Catherine Burble-Singh, she said, the changes put in place, we're removing those sort of one-word indictments of schools. She says that puts feelings above facts. Do you think she's right?
Well, I think, the whole thing came about as a result of the horrendous suicide of one particular school lady, the death of Ruth Perry, who was head of Caversham Primary in Reading, who took her own life last year after her school was downgraded in an Ofsted inspection. There are basically 4 categories: outstanding, good, requires improvement, or inadequate. We need to have transparency in education. There needs to be these sort of labels, as you do in other things, to say if they're any good. But I think it's just to do it on feeling. It is not right. People pay an absolute fortune for schooling if they're doing it privately, but also wanting to know what the local schools are like. And this sort of Ofsted badge is helping people do that. People can then get further details as appropriate if they look at the whole report. So while she's not pro-abolishing judgments, but only when accompanied by transparency is the way forward. So you need to know what these schools are up to, what the limitations are. But single word judgments, I think, think are helpful for some people, honestly.
We've got a representative from Ofsted on Times Radio Breakfast, so stay listening for that. The Home Secretary has got an idea, which I think if it worked would be great, but you wonder what the tech companies will make of this, saying mobile phone companies will be told to introduce a kill switch that allows your smartphone, if someone steals it from you, to be disabled as soon as they're stolen, in effect to try and make the value of the phone then totally worthless to whoever's nicked it. I mean, it sounds like a good idea. How practical is this?
Well, it is possible from a technical point of view, as you know, my background as a futurist, as well as intellectual property lawyer, that's what you can look at. So tech is very, very possible. But it's not just the phones themselves. It's also the data on those phones, which is incredibly valuable to the thieves. And mobile phone theft recorded by police has more than doubled. It was 78,000 in the year to March 2024, or 214 a day. And I've seen it myself. And somebody tried to snatch my phone fairly recently right here in central London. And I see it all the time. And when I phoned up and reported to the police, they said, well, you're the ex-person who's reported in the last few hours. And they can do nothing about it, even though we seem to be having CCTV footage everywhere we go. So having this technology where it does degrade the value of them or actually make them worthless is absolutely something they should look at. But there are also tips that people can do about making sure they disable their own content and have a look at that sort of side, because it is more and more. The best thing to always be aware, because these people are turning up on mopeds. They come up behind people, they snatch these phones because they're unaware. But as I say, it's not just the phone, it's the data on that phone, access to bank accounts, access to all your private information and so on and so forth. That's the real killer on this.
And also sometimes people steal your phone and then they force you to unlock it because, of course, they need it to be unlocked to be able to access different things to make the phone have more value. So it's an interesting proposal from the Home Secretary. What about healthcare? We're sort of tackling all the major issues today.
Well, we're solving the world today, Rosie. I love it.
Young people, this is in the Times, and this isn't a surprise, and you may very well have done this as well, almost half of young people are willing to pay for private healthcare. It's a survey that found 44% of people in their 20s and 30s would go private if needed in the next 12 months. I mean, this is also more the on-demand generation who order things on their phones. And, if you don't want a long wait to see the GP, if you can afford it, why not order one? You kind of think maybe this is the future.
Well, you also have to say, if you can afford it, well, who's paying when it's these youngsters? It's probably still the parents, is the honest answer. So that's what they're saying. If they need it in the next 12 months, most are citing the need to be seen quickly as their main reason. This was commissioned by the Independent Health Care Providers Network, and the polls conducted by Public First. They questioned a strange figure, but 2,004 people, and almost a third, as you said they previously used private healthcare, and of those, 42% didn't even consider using the NHS first. My point, because of the demographics surveyed, I suspect it's not them paying it because they probably have less disposable income than others. So
I don't know. 25 to 34-year-olds, you'd assume they are standing on their own feet now.
Well, it depends. Private healthcare is horrendously expensive. So they might be standing on their own feet, but there's a choice between eating or heating. And basically the cost of living is horrendous at the moment. So I would question that. They didn't ask in the survey who's actually paying for it. But I'll have a little wager next time I see you, Rosie. I reckon it's probably the parents paying for that age group.
OK. Talk about parenting and phones. There's a really interesting piece in the World section of the Times today about lots of French schools implementing a phone ban, which is well worth a read this morning. But also in the Times too today, Andrew, financial infidelity. I mean, the headline of this story is, I bought a villa. These people are certainly able to afford their own private healthcare. I bought a villa. My husband didn't know. I mean, there is sort of, maybe not being completely transparent about how new an item of clothing is. But this piece goes into just kind of the extraordinary lengths that people can go to conceal purchases they've made from their other half.
It is extraordinary, isn't it, Rosie? I'm sure virtually every one of your listeners has concealed some sort of information about what they bought. There's somebody out there who probably bought an Oasis ticket at far too much money with dynamic pricing. The reality is exactly that. People are very concerned about the backlash that they may get having bought these little things, whether they rip up the receipt from Selfridges, that little bright yellow bags are discarded in the Uber, or the Amazon boxes get discarded as well before people get judged as to what they've purchased. So I get it. it. But interesting, according to a 2022 poll, it was carried out by Capital One, 38% of people fib about costs of an item, while 26% avoid talking about the item purchased. Well, I think of 38% might fib. The other percentage, basically probably lied about fibbing. So you work on that basis. I reckon the majority of people have told little white lies about what they may or may not have bought and the price that they paid.
But there are some difficult conversations, especially when you're sort of merging two households together about, what you want to spend on, how you want to share your finances, whether that's, having separate bank accounts or not at all. I was sort of quite surprised at the things people were prepared to admit to the Times journalists that they weren't to their significant other. So it's worth reading. Talking about a total waste of money, in Oxfordshire, a car park has been built with a price tag of £51 million. There's an aerial photograph of it inside the paper.
Yes.
But planning problems are preventing motorists from actually using it. So you can't actually get into the car park. You wonder who gave that the green light to buy it. I mean, it's absolutely vast, a car park that no one can park in.
I know, you're absolutely right. You can't park here. Well, you're absolutely right. You can't park there because they can't connect this particular £51 million. It's in Oxfordshire. And it's lying empty because the council cannot connect it to the main road. And yet again, it's planning problems are preventing motorists from using this 19-acre parkland ride scheme. And basically, they're waiting for funding to secure this infrastructure, the build of the infrastructure, linking it to the A40. There's a lovely picture in the Times.
I'm not sure I'd say lovely. I mean, it looks really grotty. I think what was supposed to happen, there were supposed to be some improvements done to the A40, but they've been cancelled and now you're stuck. So it would be a park and ride car park. Yes, and they've put some nice red circles around saying where there could be some potential connections to the road, but they are very much unfinished at this point. So you'll be unable to park and ride in that car park. Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew Eborn, barrister, broadcaster, Futurist, president of Octopus TV, going through the papers with me this morning.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.